Normally, I'm the Equalities Chair in Brighton Hove, but here today to represent also Brighton Hove, but Trevor Mewton as well.
Thank you. Good morning, Matt Furness, Cabinet Member for Transport, Surrey County Council.
Good morning, Vince Lucas, Director of South East LEP.
Good morning, Joy Dennis, Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport, West Sussex County Council.
Good morning, Cabinet Member for Transport, Southampton City Council, Councillor Eamon Keogh.
Jeff French, being the chair of the Transport Forum since it was established.
Morning, Councillor Rob Humby, leader of Hampshire County Council.
I'm Philip Andrews. I'm in charge of roadie strategy development in Department of Transport. Elliot Shaw is National Highways, sitting on my right, we'll be back in a second.
Morning, everyone. Richard Leonard, Head of Network Development at National Highways.
Morning, everyone. Andy Rind at DFT Regional Team.
Morning, I'm Daniel Ruiz. I'm a director with the Enterprise M3 LEP, but also wear a hat as member of the board of the Office of Rail and Road.
Hello, Councillor Dan Watkins, representing Kent County Council.
I'm Rupert Clubb, Chief Officer, Transport South East.
Thank you very much. And we've got officers from TFSE and other support officers around. Thank you and welcome everybody this morning. Vince has said he's the new leader of Medway, so welcome. I was going to welcome Councillor Vernon Jackson, but he's not made it. Welcome to Councillor Leslie Palm, attending for Trevor. And I think we need to acknowledge and record our thanks to colleagues that have left us since our last meeting. In particular, well, in no particular order, but starting with Councillor Tony Page, who was Vice Chair for a long time and has taken the opportunity to become, as I understand, the Mayor of Reading now and handed over his portfolio. Alan Jarrett, who was the leader of Medway. We used to have Councillor Elaine Hills from Brighton, Councillor Lynn Stagg from Portsmouth, and then we had two reps from our borough and districts, which was Councillor Colin Kemp and Councillor David Monk. And we'll come to it later, but they haven't appointed new members yet, but they're still there. And welcome to Elliot this morning from National Highways and Philip from DFT. So thank you all and welcome everybody else. So as I say, we have apologies from Councillor Trevor Mewton and Ellie Burrows and the two district and borough reps. If I can deal with agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, the draft minutes have been circulated, so I really just want to approve them. Is there anyone going to move them? Second them? Any questions? Any matters arising on there? No? Thank you. So we come to declarations of interest, which is for any members of the partnership board with any interest that they need to declare in relation to the agenda. None? I'm now going to hand over to Rupert, Senior Officer, to take us through the governance.
Well, thank you, Chairman. So the paper in front of you, paper 4, is a governance report for Transport for the South East. And I'd ask for nominations for the Chair of Transport for the South East for the coming year, please.
I'm happy to nominate him. I'm happy to second.
Are there any other nominations? All those in favour? So, Councillor Glazier, I'd be the first to offer you congratulations for the year. I'll now hand over to you to complete the rest of the paper.
Thank you very much. Seriously, this has been a long journey, but I think it's one that collectively we have achieved a lot. And as I tell people, we're only as good as the team. So thank you all very much for the role that you play. Which brings me on to nominate and elect the vice chair. And if you permit, I'll nominate Rob Humby as vice chair. Somebody second that, please. Yeah. Thank you very much. Anybody, any other nominations? No? So all in favour, I hope.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we come to chair of the audit panel down further. Oh yes, right, that's okay. We do it in order. So we go to the chair of the Transport Forum again. I'm second, Jeff. Well done. Anyone against? Thank you very much. So the two people nominated collectively from the Local Enterprise Partnership, I assume that you are still nominated, and we would want to adopt and agree Vince and Daniel. All in favour? Agree. Thank you very much. We don't have the person from National Parks here today. Is Ian still their nomination?
So we heard, I think on Friday, that Ian is, I think, stepping down from National Parks. So we're waiting to hear from them about a nominated person.
Thank you. So we'll just await their nomination. And again, the same with districts and boroughs. I think there's a process being put in place. Might just ask county colleagues if they have any connections with their borough and districts to. So we have, for Jeff's forum, we have 5 nominations, 1 from each of the counties, and then they nominate 2 out of their 5 to become board members. Representatives from National Highways, National Rail and Transport for London. So we approve as printed, yeah? Thank you. And we will allocate voting rights, 1 vote each, to the 2 local enterprise representatives, Chair of Transport Forum and the nominated reps from boroughs and districts. Are we happy to agree that again? Thank you. Appoint for a period of 1 year Chair of Transport Forum. We've already done that. Appoint the Chair and membership of the Audit and Governance Committee for a period of 1 year. So I'd like to nominate Joy Dennis as the chair. Does anyone want to second that? Are we happy with that? Do we need to go through the way it reads is appoint the chair,
I think for the purposes of minutes.
And membership, but can we?
So, Chair, if you don't mind, I'll pick up the membership of the Governance Committee.
I'm very happy for that to happen. We'll find out who you got on the committee later, Joy. Thank you very much. And note the request for members to return their completed register of interest forms. I'm sure we're all happy to do that. Good. Excellent. So there are no statements from the public today. So we move on to RIS 3 presentation, and I understand that Philip is going to introduce.
Yes, a bit of a triple act here. Bit of a triple act here between myself and Richard and Elliot here. Just back to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just to use a couple of front slides to frame the conversation. This just reminds you what the actual RIS is. I think my message, besides the boring process point, my main message here is it's not just about schemes. It's about setting a long-term vision for more than the 5-year period of 2025 to 2030. It's about the performance we expect National Highways to deliver for us, for you, for the user, for the economy. And of course, we'll see more of that in the slide back later about the importance of maintaining the asset and the current system. And also, obviously, it's like I said, about performance spec and long-term vision. So I'll just leave it at that, and you can just move on, please. Next. This again is, well, the complicated diagram basically says we're basically in the phase of consulting and making decisions. We've done lots of work on studies, on the route strategies, again, which colleagues here will talk about a bit more in a moment. But we're basically in that decision phase space where the big red arrow is, and we're currently in the middle of the consultation, as you'll be aware. And this is where we start to really pull this together and ministers start making choices. I think my main message on this one, of course, is you'll be aware there'll be some hard choices to be made. Ministers still working through at the moment with anticipation that we should get a published draft RIS out in the autumn. I'll use that word carefully, as autumn, as you might expect, I'm afraid. After summer stroke autumn is, I think, the phrase I'll have recorded. Then for that, we'll press through the process with the intention of having the final RIS published in 2024 to allow National Highways to start delivering planning ahead of the start of the RIS 3 period. While I'm here, I'm going to abuse and jump to, not actually physically though, but just mention the consultation process. Clearly we have a public consultation process on. I think the important message to yourselves is this, that you are not just another consultee. You're very much part of the engagement process. You're not just first amongst equals, you're a fundamental partner in this process. And I hope you feel like you'll be treated that way by ourselves in my team and National Highways colleagues. I would say my ask of you in this process is ruthless prioritisation. As you're aware, there are some challenges for the UK economy and for government funding. And I think being absolutely clear about what matters to you and in which order is really fundamental. I'd also say that your role in identifying very strong strategic cases, especially for key corridors, is also a really important role that you do very well already, but you continue to do, please, as part of this process. If we just move on to the next one, please. So in kind of full process terms, we've set a bunch of high-level objectives for National Highways to consider, and they are producing their initial report, which is what we're consulting on. This obviously is their advice to government. Ministers will take a view and then set in the draft with the actual ask of National Highways. As you can see here, these are pretty, in some ways, one would hope to see these level of 6 strategic objectives. Should be no surprise to anybody. I think the importance of managing and planning yourself for the future, again, talks very much about the long-term asset issues, and network performance as well is about we need to make the most of the asset we have, especially an aging asset. I think I'm going to stop there and hand over for colleagues on more detail. I'll take some questions at the end as necessary. Thank you.
3 documents have been published. The initial report, Connect the Country Master Plan and RIS Strategies. I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of each of those documents. I think the most important thing to say at this point, and just echoing what Philip said, it is about partnership and collaboration. And I do want to say that these documents have been informed and shaped by the work of TFSEs and partners, and we're really grateful from National Highways and DFT for the contributions you've made. The reports build on the evidence, they build on the safer transport strategies, and hopefully you'll see a lot of that reflected in the documents I'm going to go through. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the initial report first. I think that's the overarching document which sort of sets our view of where the SRN is and our ambitions for the SRN. And then I'll go on to the Connect the Country with Strategies. So in terms of the initial report, this is the sort of the overview of what we think the network is and the opportunity is for the current state of the network, thinking about what the needs of the network are. And those needs aren't just enhancements, it's operation, maintenance, renewals, and future priorities. And thinking about the development needs and prospects, I think we're in a really interesting and exciting period around transport planning, infrastructure development. And I think the documents sort of reflect that ambition and that need for change. And that's driven by many things, such as environmental levelling up, but it's also driven by sort of digital connectivity and the opportunities that provides. The initial report is a fixed document, it informs the RIS, and it's a document which allows you to respond to various things. It also sets out what our view is of the priorities for the network. So we've set out a few priorities for the network in terms of key proposals. And the key proposals are framed around the DFT objectives for the network. So improving safety, making the most of our network, improving our customer and community offer, thinking about decarbonisation and environmental sustainability, driving that, and a targeted approach to enhance the network. I'm going to run through each of those individually really quickly, just to give you an overview of what they are and the sort of the thinking behind those. So firstly, improving the safety for all. That's a sort of a fundamental principle of National Highways, one of our core imperatives. And as you're aware, safety, we want no one to be harmed on our network. The figure to the right shows the safe system approach and our thinking around how we create a zero harm network and the sort of pillars which drive that. Within the next RIS, we'll build on what we've done. We'll think about safety in terms of safer roads, safer speeds. We'll think about how we improve safer drivers, but we're also going to focus a little bit more on star ratings. So star ratings is the inherent safety of the network. So a lot of the network in the southeast is single carriageway, APTR, so all-purpose trunk road networks. They generally have a lower star rating, but a higher risk of a serious injury. So we're going to focus on those roads, thinking about route optimizations. We're also going to be thinking about safety communications and building on that sort of work we've done around post-collision response. But safety fundamental to what we do. The next key area is how we make the most of our network in terms of maintenance and renewals. We do have an aging asset. It's common across a lot of infrastructure on the network, and it's about making sure that network's available, making sure it's resilient, and making sure it adapts to climate change, and making sure that we manage it in a way which makes the most of it. So the figure on the right shows the sort of network we've got and the key assets we've got. And one of the sort of focuses of the next RIS is about making sure we provide more funding for maintenance and major renewals across the network. The third key element, and sorry if you can't see all of the information in terms of the triangle, is about improving our customers. We've done a lot of work in RIS 1 and RIS 2 by thinking about how the SRN integrates with wider transport networks and thinking about how we play more of an active role and think about transport's unique ecosystem. So it's about being customer focused in our sort of approach, thinking about information, making sure we provide good information to customers, good information in terms of incidents and opportunities for travel. It's about broadening our offer, thinking about 5G network, thinking about how we support EV connectivity and EV charging, but it's also about how we integrate. So we've done a lot of work around urban SRN, for example, thinking about how we support multimodal transport, active travel, for example, and thinking about working with Network Rail. So a much broader offer around that area of focus. The second last area is decarbonisation, environmental sustainability. We are committed to playing a role in decarbonising our operations and our activities, as well as playing a key role in terms of delivering the government's agenda and your agendas around decarbonisation. We've also launched our environmental sustainability recently, which sets out a sort of ambitious plan about how we take forward a much more proactive role in terms of environmental husbandry. So that's thinking about biodiversity net gain, for example, and being proactive on that front. And lastly, we're thinking, that's environmental sustainable strategy, so you can see it, nature, carbon, communities. It is available on our website. It's not part of the consultation, just to confirm, but it is available for you to have a look at. And then the last element is taking a target approach enhancement. Just to clarify, that's not to say that the RIS 1 and 2 tail schemes are still not important. I think some of the consultation responses have said, does this mean that there's a sort of 360 review on enhancements? That's not the case. What we're looking at is building on RIS 1 and 2, thinking about future enhancements and needs of the network. So that covers smaller schemes, such as sort of 2 to 25 million target enhancements to our network. It also thinks about how we improve the smart motorway network, and it thinks about things such as route optimization, which look at safety and targeting longer sections of the network, 30 to 50 kilometers, thinking about how we improve safety. So importantly, it builds a more balanced investment portfolio. I think that's the key message. I'm not going to touch too much on connecting the country and RIS strategy, but I'll just give you a very quick overview. Connecting the country and RIS strategies, first of all, are live documents. So whereas the SRN initial report sets out where we are in our assessment for responses and consideration for government, connecting the country, and secondly, the RIS strategies are live documents. So they are documents which will be evolved and developed. I think that's really important to know. So Connecting the Country sets out a long-term vision for the network to 2050. It's based on trends, thinking about the future of our network. And I talked before about the challenge we've got in our network, but also the opportunities that new technologies bring. It sets out a vision for our network as well, and it sets out sort of delivery planning across a number of themes. So just as you say, the 9 focused areas which are shown on the right, so growth, levelling up, car travel, freight logistics, safety, digital decarbonisation, and then customer experience, sustainable network development, asset resilience. And what we've done in terms of the network is we've thought about how we consider the customer journey. So customer-oriented organisation, how we think about the customer in terms of customer needed on the network and how we manage that network. It's a really interesting report because it sets out a lot of the issues you've been grappling with as well in terms of trends and in terms of how the network developed. And that's not just nationally, but that's also regionally as well. And one thing that I know that's sort of generated quite a lot of interest is the proposed roads categorisation. So just to explain this, what we're thinking about is how we develop a level of service around our network, thinking about the network we've got and a level of service which reflects our 2050 ambition and what we think the outcomes are. I think there's been a bit of a view presented from other SDBs that this is about prioritising investment. That's not the case. It's about looking at the network and looking at what the network needs to do and how that network shapes. So you'll see on there are a number of national corridors, interregional corridors and regional connections in your area. It's a stylized graphic, so it doesn't cover the whole network, but it's trying to show you the shape of the graphic and thinking about level of service. I know that's quite an area of interest and focus to colleagues. Lastly, route strategy reports. These are sort of a lower level information, so they are a key part of our licence requirements. They think about the region from 2025-30. They set out various evidence. They are pretty meaty documents. The pictures on the right show you the sort of locations in your area to be considered. And they're based on an evolution of work previously. Key on route strategies is, again, they're live documents and they will evolve. Couple of key things on route strategies. Those are the regions. This is the region and what's covered in the route strategies, so you can see them there. They're pretty significant documents and lots of evidence and lots of support from colleagues within TFSE area. What they cover, challenges and issues, so they provide quite a comprehensive evidence base about the challenges and issues. They think about what the route objectives are, and those route objectives have been shaped by conversations with colleagues. And they think about potential areas for investigation. And the 3 together set out a sort of a strategy for 25-30 and beyond. There are story maps. Please go on their website. They're far more digestible than the reports. The report's about sort of 130, 150 pages long. So the story maps are useful and provide a bit of an overview and a bit more of an interactive platform, which we've worked on and quite useful. I'll not go into the route objectives or the common themes, reading that at leisure, because I'm aware there's obviously going to be questions. I think the 3 key points here is we have a Shaping the Future of England's Strategic Road Network. The consultation ends on 30th July. And secondly, we have National Highways consultations on the route strategies and the Connecting the Country Master Plan. So that's the 11th of August, and those are led by us. There are portal pages with sort of standard responses that you can access them, but I think for TFSE and colleagues, it's probably going to be letters with a far more detailed response, which is acceptable as well. Elliot, is there anything I've missed that you wish to add?
Just a couple of things. I think you guys covered it, but again, thank you for the invite today. I think from a National Highways perspective, I hope you get the sense that I think, we've tried to set out some ambitious plans on how we want to continue to improve the network for customers, for communities, but also the environment as well. I do think the context that Philip set out of, I think what we're seeing is government funding overall is tight. So, there is the flat cash capital, the spending review across government, and that obviously has an impact on DfT. I think within the department, there's clearly pressures within the department as well, so HS2, others. And then within National Highways, I think that, we also have some pressures. So particularly as I think Rich and Philip said, the ageing network. So to be honest, we know we're going to need to spend more money on renewing and maintaining the network as well. So I think all of that does mean that prioritisation is important, and the sort of shape of as we look forward will probably look a bit different. I think RIS1 and RIS2 had quite a lot of big enhancement schemes in them, and they're still important, but overall I think we definitely expect to see quite a significant shift away in RIS3. We're focusing more on sort of safety schemes, smaller improvements, as well as kind of what can we do on a sort of day-to-day basis to really improve things for customers, communities, and the environment as well. So I think it's a build, and it evolves on RIS3, RIS1 and RIS2, but I do expect RIS3 to look a little bit different in the shape going forward as well.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. There's a lot in there, and I think it's also good to hear that TFSE has been involved in the planning, and also our transport strategy has played a role, which for us is really good. If I can start with a quick question, then I'll open it up really, and just say that the concerns that spring to mind immediately is the recent written ministerial statement around the delays on the A27 corridor. I mean, this is one of our major schemes, specifically around Arundel, and you also recognise that it makes no real sense to stop the planning, because if you stop now, stop the work on it, it'd be far better to continue with the orders and processes to ensure that the scheme is ready for 2025 to 30. If you stop now, you're never going to hit that spot in our opinion. But that's a point I just thought I'd start, and then we'll open it up. Do you want to answer that now, or should we take a few and then come back? Joy wants to join in. Thank you, Joy.
Sorry, can I come in on that one? Because actually I was looking at the A27 more holistically across West Sussex. So I had put a few words together this morning just to say that obviously both our strategy and the West Sussex Transport Plan identify a need for strategic improvements to the A27, not only at Arundel, but at Chichester and Worthing and Lancing. It is the only strategic east-west corridor south of the 25 and a vital link to the largest towns and cities in the southeast, but it's constrained by the sea and the South Downs National Park. In places, the 27 is only a single carriageway and doesn't currently have enough capacity for the existing traffic, and it's worsening by the day with increased house building. And what we're seeing is obviously significant rat running on the local roads. This is acknowledged by the National Highways and the South Coast, their South Coast Central Route Strategy. But now we see the Chichester scheme's been cancelled, the Arundel scheme's deferred, and the budget for the Worthing Lancing scaled back, so none of the options proffered can be delivered. And we're only talking about 20 million there. To date, there has been no improvements, and the stop-start approach is eroding business and public confidence. And we need to see a collective ability to resolve this problem. By getting RIS3 to address this, by delivering the Arundel bypass would be a start. We need sufficient budget to deliver good value for money schemes at Worthing and Lancing, and a consultation at least on a range of options for Chichester, which we know is going to be difficult. And we know building roads alone doesn't necessarily solve the problems, but there is historic underinvestment in this area, and changes are needed to support economic growth.
It is a very, very important road. Is there anything anyone else wants to add to that? Rupert, do you want to?
Yes.
It works.
No, thank you for that, Chair, and thank you, Joy. I think we recognise the importance of the A27, and actually the route strategies talk about many of the issues you set out, and they do identify the improvements through what RIS1 and 2 tail and RIS3. I think it's really interesting as well that CT, the Connecting the Country, also recognises the importance of that as an inter-regional corridor stretching east to west, and I think we recognise that as well. I know there have been a few issues in terms of taking forward schemes. I think I'm also looking at a few schemes around safety and route optimisation on that corridor, thinking about how we improve the corridor in terms of its operation as well. So there's lots of work in the background being done, as well as schemes being taken forward. I think on the Arundel, there's been a deferral as they review the evidence, just to make sure for DCO licensing they've got the right evidence. You'd be aware that the process to get a DCO requires a lot of surveys, historic surveys and traffic modelling. I think they're just reviewing that in terms of the deferral to make sure that when they do go to DCO, they've got the evidence there and it isn't subject to challenge. So I think it's a little bit of work the team are doing in that space at the moment. I think as well it's important to recognise that, and I'm really pleased for your contributions actually, it's not just about a scheme, it's about movements of people in goods from one area to another and across the network and how that network works. I think when you read the route strategies, hopefully it'll give you that evidence-based sort of that we see them recognise the interrelationships between schemes, and I know Arundel certainly does. Philip Elliott.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to refer you back to the written ministerial statement, as I would do as the department official, I'm afraid. I think, ministers had to make some choices in this space, and this was a choice they made. I think, again, your role as making sure the clarity you produce about the corridors, about their strategic importance and your strategy is what you need to keep doing in this space. And we'll see how the situation evolves. I'm not sure I can add a lot more to what Richard said in this space too.
I suppose I was just going to offer more of a reflection. I think we would love to improve the A27 corridor. And, I kind of reflect, actually, it was my team years ago that did the feasibility study there. But it's really, I think we found it really difficult. And there is something, I remember the old roads minister said, building roads is a political act. And it is, in the sense that actually I think you need broad support from the communities, from politicians, from stakeholders, etc., in order to actually kind of make an investment and make an intervention. And I think, to be honest, sometimes on the A27 it's been difficult, to get that and get that consensus around this intervention is the right intervention and we're all going to be behind it. So I think one of the things kind of going forward I would sort of ask and question is, how do we come together to make sure that there is that kind of coalition of support? Because there are places, to be honest, around the country where there is, and actually it means you can crack on and sort of do it. I think, we all are very conscious that I think it is trickier, there, because of the nature of the road, the communities, its interaction with the communities. So I think the more that we can do looking forward, that actually is, I'm not saying realistic in terms of scaling down ambition, but realistic about the level of buy-in that we need, I think, jointly to do these things and can take communities with us, the better, because it is really frustrating, I think, from our perspective as well, when you have these, you're developing something and then it gets knocked back. It is not the ideal way of working from our perspective as well. So I think, again, it's where I think the joint work between TFSE and, National Highways is really important, because that political buy-in, the community buy-in is so fundamental to being able to deliver.
I would just add, I think Elliot's beautifully articulated my use of the word strategic, support the strategic case in every definition of the word as strategic, and I think that's I would very much agree with Elliot's point about how you pull this all together.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously in my patch I have Junction 9 M3, Junction 10 M27, so a few issues around there still. And the A326, I did say with the first ever meeting we had of this, Keith, I'd only mentioned Hampshire once, but as you mentioned West Sussex, I thought I gave open up the door to mention Hampshire. So interesting you say about we've always spoke about one voice and working in partnerships, and that is the only way to do it. Interesting, and I understand from the political point of view, very frustrating on both sides. So the two things there obviously comes down in terms of the funding. So we look at Junction 10, the M27, we had contingencies and safety valves on top of there, but 25% increase in costs. Now we've got to go back and look again. I met Gove a couple of weeks ago having a conversation, I think, with your colleagues about how we're going to fund that gap there. But I'm interested it's not just, is it, working from that political side from our side, it's about other organisation and partnerships. And in that particular case, it's Homes England. So just want to make sure that when we say we're joined up, it's those other partners as well, because it might not be us from political side from it could be another body that actually, I don't want to say causing an issue, but maybe we need to be talking to them more openly between the two of us. Just really a comment, really, Chairman.
I was just, I totally agree. That there's a coalition of partners need to come together, I think, in any sort of scheme, and it will vary. Say sometimes it's Homes England, sometimes it's others, but yeah, it is bringing those together again. I think there's been lots of really good evidence of how we've worked together on it, but it is so important. So. Yeah, totally.
It's just the point, no matter how much planning we do and all the data we get and everything else, it will always come down to the funding, and then it's that arrangement with the Treasury you have through yourself as well when we get to that point. So then it's frustrating for all of us, of course. So yeah, so partnership and giving early heads up with each other, I think, pays dividends in the end. Yeah.
And also on a project by project level. I'm sure National Highways doing good work. I, for example, have just been in some very intense conversation with my object numbers on the kind of like housing investment fund to make sure we understand where we're aligned and where we're not aligned and all that kind of space too. So at our level, we're trying to make sure we do that cross Whitehall silo busting as much as we do on small projects.
Thank you. Jeff, followed by Dan.
Yeah, thanks very much. I admired all that you presented and all that you, especially Elliot, in your summing up initially, and the good things that are needed. But somewhere along the line, we have to recognise that we're probably in a worse financial situation than we have been for quite a long time. And so I worry that we don't set too many hairs running, which just get delayed and delayed and delayed. I know the A27 is delayed by perhaps for different reasons, but I think we've got to be, what we need is realistic, what's the right word? Funding, I suppose, for want of a better issue. Otherwise, we're going to march people up to the top of the hill and then we're going to march them down again. And I think that would be very bad for us and for transport in general.
I think I agree, and I think one of the things about clarity with ministers about for example, all pipeline schemes was that's, I think part of the decision-making process there was about, let's be real about not running 32 pipeline schemes at full bore in a world where that might have been an interesting conversation. Dan.
I mean, I was just going to say I do totally agree. I mean, I think it is more constrained. It's certainly more constrained than I think we saw in RIS 1 or RIS 2. It's uncertain. I think Philip and I are at Treasury this afternoon actually trying to argue about the money. But you know, the reality is the overall government financial position is tight. So I don't think there is going to be kind of lots and lots of new sort of things in the way. And I think, as I said, there will be a shift to sort of smaller things where there are. So I think there's, I would still hope we can do a lot of positive things and kind of create a lot of benefit for customers, communities, etc. But it will be more constrained. So I think we do need to be realistic.
Dan.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to continue the county carousel here. So from a Kent perspective, I think in particular, Bluebell Hill and the M2 junction, it's a kind of necessary stepping stone really to the Lower Thames crossing, which you flagged up in the presentation. And again, it's the clarity word, isn't it? Not to repeat what you've already sort of reassured us on. I think getting clarity on that's incredibly helpful. And if we have got, less funds, as Jeff said, in the future, clarity can be provided, even if it's sometimes saying these things are not going to happen because of financial constraints, thus sort of releasing the ones that will happen and giving us that clarity so we can plan for the future. So I think anything you can keep pressing your officers on to help us with that will be well received.
Okay. Matt. Did you want to reply to that, or are you just taking that as a given?
I think, indeed, yes. I think, I'm sure colleagues in the delivery end of this would like a little more clarity in this space. As you say, there's a combination of, wasting everybody's time and money and effort and brain space and enthusiasm, and let's make sure we're focused on ones that actually be real runners. I think is a really important message. We would completely agree. And the more you guys said, that's my point about ruthless prioritisation and that message being clear from you to our seniors, I think is a really important message too.
Matt.
Thanks, Keith. There was just a point on your slide where you mentioned about reducing congestion on your network, the strategic road network. I think it would be good if you can actually expand that to the local road network where it meets, because actually a lot of congestion points are on those points. So I think if you can expand it, because it goes wider than your network. On the second point, I was going to say, because we're all plugging for our own areas, anyway, was really about that southeast quadrant, particularly around the M25 and the A3 corridor in particular for all its economic growth. I mean, we've invested in Hindhead, we've invested in Junction 10. Guildford's now your pinch point in the middle that we really need to look at. Now, I know you're doing work on air quality, but it needs to go beyond that because that's actually a key strategic economic route. But it's just those 2 points. Thank you.
I'll let Rich come in about the wider work being done by National Highways about that very point. I also own the Major Route Network programme as well for my sins, so I have fought in both camps, absolutely recognise that, and I think we're trying to make sure as much, in a world where we still have a lot of different local highways authorities across the piece, trying to make sure we get the join as much as possible and the thinking across the borders, as it were, as much as possible, I think.
Yeah, and in terms of network development, we have worked with Surrey and Guildford colleagues around A3, looking at broader sort of interventions, and that work sort of completed in terms of work. But we're also thinking about what do we do next with Guildford? How do we take forward that work, recognising that the problem's still there in terms of the network. I do want to say as well, in terms of your point about local congestion, improving the SRN reinforces network hierarchy. A lot of rat running, as Joy was talking around, is because the SRN isn't functioning as it should for strategic movements. So improving the SRN does have that benefit, but we do recognise, and I think we've done this with designated funds and certainly the schemes we developed, that the issues in the SRN are often caused by junctions off the network. So the solution to the issues on our network are not always on our network, and that includes things like multimodal and park and rides and all these other opportunities as well. So I think we are looking at options around the A3. We're looking at the M25, and again, the route strategy set out those areas of interest, those areas where we're going to focus on where we think the route objectives, the performance needs improved. So it sets out sort of a plan of attack.
Eamon.
So I just wanted to ask about the future for smart motorways within this programme and what learning we might have identified as a result of some of the concerns that have been raised and the delays and that follow-up. Because, you know, some people might argue that actually that investment would have been better else in the network.
Well, as you're aware, the PM Minister has been quite clear about the future of the Smart Motorway programme in that sense. What we talk about here is a fact, in this presentation, is a fact about the retrofit work in that space on the refuge areas. But there will be no new smart motorways as far as the programme is concerned at the moment. I think the interesting lesson I take away from it is the point about technology and handling how people take on technology. I mean, both, you know, whatever safety technology in the future, connected vehicles, that kind of thing. I think in an increasingly technology-enabled network, my takeaway from the smart motorways story is making sure you take the public with you effectively, get the right evidence base. That is an easier sell, of course, in that space, but all these things, I think we need to make sure we are clearer with the public about the benefits and issues around them.
I mean, without repeating what Philip said, I mean, I think internally there's a lot of reflection that goes on smart motorways, because I think, yeah, I mean, firstly, I'd echo exactly what Philip said. There are no new smart motorway schemes in RIS3. It is about continuing to invest in technology and in kind of more emergency areas. I do think, you know, smart motorways are performing as they were set out to. So they were basically set out to be the safest roads in the country in terms of killed and seriously injured. We still see that, you know, so they are still the safest roads out there. But yet we haven't taken the public with us sort of through that journey. I do think it is really interesting when you're looking at some of the autonomous vehicle stuff that's coming out. They're using exactly the same sort of safety assessments that we did sort of back in the day. And is that right? Because I do think the expectations around technology are different, I think, to sort of traditional sort of interventions. So I think we continue to reflect, but the main thing we want to do is make sure that the smart motorways that are out there are continuing to improve, continuing to be the safest roads in the country. And, you know, we will continue to educate people on them and, you know, try and build sort of public support around them. But I think we recognise that it was not the time to be rolling out more, given the kind of public kind of, you know, kind of level of kind of debate around them. So it made sense to pause, take stock and continue to focus on what we have.
Thank you. Rupert, do you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. I think just a couple of points. The emphasis on maintenance and smaller schemes, I think understandably that's sensible, but it's sensible where you've got a well-developed network. And in the southeast, as you know, and it highlighted in your own report, some real KSI challenges around the A21, the 27, and a number of those sort of single carriageway elements of the trunk road, which, as Councillor Dennis pointed out, in some places feel like little more than a country lane, and yet they're the strategic road network. And I think linked on to that, I think it would be helpful to set out in a little more clearer way what the new hierarchy means in connecting the country. I think there's a risk at first sight that it creates a sort of tier system for investment. I don't think that's your intention, but I think that needs to be spelt out. It didn't strike me as a bit odd the link from Felixstowe down to London wasn't considered to be nationally significant. And we would argue that being the only orbital outside the M25, the A27, for all the reasons you've heard, is an important corridor. I'm really grateful for the work that you've done with Transport for the South East through the route corridor work. I think it's been really, really good engagement. And if I play back how RIS1, do it to them, RIS2, a little bit more engagement, and RIS3, I think it really does feel like a collaboration. I think just drawing on some of the schemes, there are some challenges, the A3 for Guildford, undoubtedly, and the A27. I mean, the A27 at Arundel, we have asked the Minister comes down and sees for himself how challenging it is to move from Southampton, Portsmouth, all the way along that M27, A27, 259 corridor. There is no reliability. It is completely unpredictable. And what you do, or what the Minister's done with that decision, is sow seeds of doubt. So, business confidence of communities. It starts to impact on housing delivery. Councillor Dennis picked up the levels of housing in Arran district, for example. And that's quite challenging to deliver if you've got an underdeveloped SRN. And if you look at places like Arundel, that is all through traffic. Slightly different for Worthing. And I don't think you can tinker with Worthing. Do a proper scheme, or not at all. And we have set out and prioritised some of the things that we think stack up strategically from a strategic economic perspective. Which brings me on to the point of prioritisation. So Philip, absolutely right that prioritisation is key. We have demonstrated that many times. The board have demonstrated that many times, not least with the MRN, and we've made some real strong decisions about prioritisation. And it does beg the question about whether we should be having further discussions with the department about regional funding allocations against which subnational transport bodies prioritise. The board has demonstrated their ability to do so, and rather than wait for a ministerial written statement to land, having the STBs do that prioritisation within the funding envelope might be a sensible next step. We will put together, and the board will have sight of that, our responses to the two consultations. I'm grateful for the 12-week consultation from the National Highways. I'm less grateful for the 8-week consultation from the DFT. It seems like other public bodies go for a 12-week consultation, except central government. And if there is any opportunity to extend that, it would be most welcome. But if it doesn't, then we will respond within it. But I'd just like to make the point again that the level of engagement on this has been exemplary by comparison to where it has been. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'd like to ask with a kind of a let pat on about growth and specifically about freight. And can you comment on how you're going to be making sure that there is a degree of integration between the various modes over the course of RIS3? It's quite nice that CP7 is being dealt with at the same time as RIS3. So integration of modes, how we can make sure that we get the best flow of freight through the southeast. And alongside that, a bit of a comment on how you're going to use technology. And I'm thinking specifically about M20, but it applies more generally as well.
If I start at a general level, I've been doing the job for nearly 8 years now, and I have to say in the last 18 months, obviously driven by certain things in Kent, the department has got a really much stronger grip on logistics and a logistics network, and is doing lots of work on understanding the flow of widgets much more effectively. and a much more clearer approach to all this from the port to the Midlands to the users, that kind of thing. So just in terms of policy terms, probably less visible, but a lot more work, a lot more data collection, a lot more clarity about the risks and issues in this space and the alternatives. So just to reassure that...
Alternatives means opportunities. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, opportunities. But I'll hand over Rich back to talk about it in more detail either way. But
yeah, we do a lot of work with the freight industries. You expect one of our key customers. It's interesting. So we do a lot of work with Network Rail. We do a lot of work with rail freight operators. Some of our pipeline schemes, the strategic cases around strategic freight interchanges. So M6 Junction 22, all about the Freeport, all about strategic freight. We also work across the country thinking about schemes where intermodal freight opportunities are really important, whether it's supporting Network Rail's Ely Junction improvements. I think that's 900,000 HGVs off the A14. So a lot of work strategic looking at freight. What I would say about freight as well is we're doing a lot of work thinking about the freight industry and how we support the freight industry, such as driver shortages, how we're managing demand towards the ports in terms of technology and information to make sure that we're not having lots of HGVs parked. So I think there's a lot of work underway, and I would say in terms of engagement recently, there's been far more activity, but far more activity about how we support the freight industry in terms of making the network efficient and thinking about intermodal opportunities, but also how we support it in a much wider context as a key customer for us.
Without wanting to be a voice of it, I think it's just really important to be realistic on the freight. So as Rich says, I think, we do spend a lot of time engaging with freight. For us, we're largely a freight network, so we're focused on really understanding the benefits that our network brings to freight. As Rich said, actually, we've spent quite a lot of time over the last few years working with Network Rail, particularly thinking about where are the opportunities to shift freight from road to rail. Studies, for example, on the southern ports through to the Midlands, which is a particular sort of block. I suppose the one thing I say is pretty difficult, because it does involve Network Rail kind of increasing kind of capacity, etc., on their network. And also we've got to be realistic around the difference it will make. So it will help, but I think there's 10 times as much freight on the roads as there are on rail. So if you increase, even if you increase rail by 20%, it's only kind of taking little bits off, which can help and can help relieve pinch points, but important to put into context. And then on the technology side, happy to pick up separately, Danny. I think there is a increasing focus that we are a technology-enabled network, and actually we need to get that to the technology that we have right and working well. But we have a digital for customers agenda in particular, which is about trying to kind of improve the data that goes out to customers. And also, I think, increasingly looking at with connected vehicles, how do we ingest data that kind of can help us operate the network. So I think that will be a kind of increasing focus as you look towards the sort of latter end of the 2020s. In reality, more and more vehicles are going to be connected. So we should be able to use that to become a better operator.
And does that in practical terms means that, for example, you might be kind of holding freight in the Midlands or kind of controlling the flow of freight from the Midlands such that the ports on the south coast are not subject to the kind of pressures they are now?
It's a model.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'd be a little bit surprised, to be honest. I think in reality, I think some of those conversations happened around Brexit and, that the ability to kind of control freight in different parts of the country, it's quite difficult. I think obviously as technology kind of increases, you have more levers to do that. But actually kind of ensuring compliance, etc., is just practically really hard. So I think there'll be more information, more ability to influence, but will it get there? I'm not sure.
And my slight challenge back to members of the panel is, of course, it's your growth plans that, of course, produce the demand for this in the first place. So try and make sure there's real, as there is, but increasing the integration between the transport planning, local transport plans, the regional plans, and the growth plans is also part of this conversation as well, of course.
Thank you. I don't think we've got. Can I just thank you for all three of you for your comments and for the presentation. There's clearly an awful lot of work gone on. There's an awful lot more work to do, and I hope you sense that TFSE remain totally engaged and happy to work and contribute where we can. So I just think the next 18 months is going to be a testing time for all of us. So the more we can do together, the better it will be. And I think we go back to what was said earlier. I think some, if we're going to make announcements, realistic announcements would be better than some that might be more futuristic, if that makes sense. Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for your contribution this morning. It's been really helpful. Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the transport strategy refresh. Mark, are you going to introduce that? Oh, you're there. Sorry. Beat me to it.
Good morning, everybody. Microphone on? Yes? No? Good. My name is Mark Vallely. I am Head of Strategy at Transport for the South East, for those that you don't know me. What I just want to do is introduce this item about the work that we're proposing to undertake on the transport strategy refresh. So just want to talk about the how we went about developing the existing transport strategy and set out the rationale as to why we want to undertake a refresh. Talk about some options that we've developed for the refresh, and then finally sum up with some conclusions and recommendations. So I know a number of members are new to TFSE, but what I just wanted to set out important context about the journey that we went on with the existing transport strategy, which started back in 2018 with the development of an economic connectivity review. And as the slide says, so this was all about us identifying the role that strategic transport investment plays in developing the economy, establishing the rationale for investment in our region to stimulate economic growth, and identifying the size of the potential prize that would generate in terms of increase in GVA. And it also set out the strategic case for the development of a transport strategy. Another fundamental pillar of the way that we went about developing the existing strategy was the use of scenario planning. So given the uncertainties that we face in the future, it's a mechanism for sort of identifying different potential futures that could come into being, and looking as to how the South East would develop in different ways, such that it provides us with some way of saying, well, we're not quite sure how the future is going to map out. So let's map out some different futures and see what they could look like. And there's intensive stakeholder engagement around this process to develop these 4 different scenarios, which obviously we're testing different potential future situations. Very much this was about us trying to now follow rather predict and provide approach about sort of looking at past trends and extrapolating those into the future. This is about saying what could the future look like and how could we plan for that. So from the work that we did looking at these various different futures, we identified a preferred scenario, which was our sustainable route to growth, which included and encompassed elements of each of those 4 scenarios, and importantly provided us with the basis for our 2050 vision, which is the root of the existing transport strategy. So what did we learn from the work that we've done? Important lessons were learnt. I think we all have to celebrate the existing transport strategy. At the time it was published, words were being used like groundbreaking, and it's been held up as an example of good practice by the DFT. Other STBs have been encouraged to sort of follow the general route way that we did. So it's a sort of an example of good practice. Following this vision-led approach that we did, so like I say, planning and providing for a future rather than predicting and providing, provided with the mechanism for identifying this clear 2050 vision, enabling us to take account of the uncertainty that is ahead of us. And also the information that the evidence base that we developed for the strategy, which was fundamental to its development, has obviously provided good quality evidence for others within our geography to use in support of their own technical work and business case development. But there are some inevitably lessons learned, things that we could potentially think about doing better if we were to refresh the strategy, particularly about the stakeholder engagement process that we did. Absolutely fine, textbook, but very much the way we did it was sort of a check and challenge, with us developing some technical content, engaging with stakeholders as we went along and saying, what do you think about this? How could we improve? Is there a question? Is there a better way or a different way, a more engaged way of doing that? We still have some, as every STB and everybody does, uncertainty about the impact of the strategy on the ground. I mean, it's been with us since 2023, but there's been an awful since 2020, and it's 3 years old. But there's still these uncertainties about exactly what impact will it have, will it continue to have out on the ground. And we still have some gaps in our evidence base, which is not just for us, but for STBs more generally about, the levers that we're pulling in terms of transport interventions, what actual impact are they having more directly on some of these big outcomes that we're trying to achieve around decarbonisation, economic growth, levelling up, and tackling social inclusion. How could we be a bit smarter potentially about what we're doing and what we need to do to adopt a smarter approach? So sort of having set out some of those challenges, it's just sort of setting out a rationale as to why we think we need to refresh the strategy. It was our intention when the original strategy was agreed to refresh it every 5 years. So if we were to meet that timeline of, given that we started in 2020, we would need to start the work now to deliver a refreshed strategy in 2025. But we've had significant changes in government policy since the original strategy was adopted. Obviously, the increased focus on decarbonisation, the levelling up agenda has come forward. We've had the impact of COVID on our travel market, with those impacts continuing to be felt, and the impact of Brexit, which particularly within our geography, given the number of international gateways that we have, has impacted on flows of people and freight through those gateways. So right. So in terms of some work that we've done to inform the paper that's before you today, what we've done is just some preliminary work to sort of start to look at what might need to happen as part of a refresh. So some work on looking at how the policy context has changed, looking at the key policy documents that have come forward nationally and how those might impact on a transport strategy within our geography. Looking at the baseline data, as I said, there's been some significant changes in the travel market as a consequence of COVID, and we need to think about how we could take account of those in refreshing the strategy. We've also undertaken some interviews with other STBs and other regional policymakers, the Welsh Government, just to see what emerging best practice is on sort of strategy refreshes. A number of these organisations like ourselves have developed a strategy. How have they gone about refreshing theirs, and what can we learn from that? So just to summarise what that activity has told us, in terms of the sort of the baseline evidence that we collected for the original strategy, clearly COVID has had an impact and is continuing to have a big impact on travel patterns. And some of the issues, as I sort of highlighted about the evidence about how our strategy and the levers that we're pulling within it, what impact are they actually having on the outcomes that we're trying to seek? And could we, that evidence is sometimes patchy and lacking, and we need to see if we can tighten up our act there. Obviously, the changes in the travel market and the changes to sort of policy have had an impact on the scenarios. We've had a look to see how those scenarios that I showed on a previous slide, whether they're coming into being or not. Some of them sort of are on track, but the one, particularly the London hub, is way off track. That issue about London becoming a dominant economic force within our area is certainly not something that's not coming into being. So we need to think about the need to potentially refresh those scenarios. And as I said earlier, there have been significant changes in the policy landscape that we need to take account of in any refreshed strategy document. So in terms of just some options, just to sort of how could we go about this? Well, regardless of what option we took, and two options are presented in the paper, there are various things that we need to do. And this slide just summarises the sort of the technical work and the stakeholder engagement and the programme and project management work that we would need to do, sort of broken down into a number of tasks. So we would need to do each of these activities regardless of which of the options we selected. So as set out in the paper, we've looked at two potential options that we could adopt. Sort of option one, which we called a basic refresh, and option two, a more comprehensive refresh of the strategy. So the basic option would basically be trying to amend the document that's already in there. So it's not a whole scale sort of starting it from the beginning. It's taking the material that we've got and looking to see how we could update it where possible. So sense checking and updating is a sort of the main theme. We would still, under this approach, be adopting the sort of check and challenge approach to engagement, sort of producing technical work and then checking in with stakeholders about what they thought of that content as we went through, with a 20-month timeline from start to finish in terms of getting a strategy developed. So the comprehensive approach would result in a fully revised strategy rather than amending. We would sort of be going back to sort of the back to basics. A more comprehensive update of the evidence base and the scenarios, looking for essentially to come up with some new scenarios potentially, if the evidence warranted that. And this more extensive and involved approach to stakeholder engagement with what we're calling a co-creation approach. So rather than the show and tell sort of check and challenge approach, engaging with our stakeholders in a more deep way all the way through the strategy to help us generate the content. The consequence of sort of undertaking this more comprehensive approach would be a stronger golden thread, both to the national policy documents, but also, and vitally important, to the emerging local transport plans, to make sure that we've got our objectives aligned as far as possible. And outcome, what we would say, a higher quality, more robust, future-proof strategy. And saying it as it is, there are some significant political challenges potentially ahead of us. So it's quite important to make sure that the evidence base and the strategy that we produce is as robust as possible to sort of ride the waves of political uncertainty that may be before us. But that obviously, as the sort of the main difference here, it would take longer to produce this version. So just looking quickly at two timelines for the two different options. This is route option, the route map for option one, which is just the basic approach. So we've got like a 12-month period of technical work to produce a draft strategy that would then come through the board in July next year, so a year from now. A 3-month public consultation on that piece of work. And then a period where we would finalise the strategy based on the comments that we'd received, and then a final process of an opportunity for those authorities that want to take the sort of the draft final version back through their own political process to sign off on that. So final strategy ready for delivery to government by March 2025. In terms of the more comprehensive refresh, this shows an 18-month period of development, and then the similar stages of following that, with a slightly longer period to finalise the strategy, because the reality is we have county council elections in May 2025, and obviously we don't want to be doing any activity that during that stage. So a slightly longer period for finalisation. With the final version of the strategy being brought to the board in July 2025 for sign-off, and again that period following that for those authorities that want to take the final draft version through their own political processes back at their authorities. So in terms of some cost estimates, and these are just preliminary, we'd obviously need to work with the supplier that we want to engage to undertake this work to sort of check these through. But in terms of just some preliminary numbers, the original strategy and the economic connectivity review, the outturn cost for that was about £813,000. And in terms of the two options that are presented in the paper, the basic option would be 412k, with the more comprehensive refresh coming in at 646. So some of the costs that we incurred as part of the original strategy development, for example, the development of our strategic land use model, obviously those won't be re-incurred. But what we have put into the comprehensive refresh option is the consequences, and from a cost point of view, of this deeper co-design engagement process, and also some additional cost, particularly for consultation analysis after the final strategy is, or following the public consultation, some additional costs there to make sure that we answer all of the issues that are raised through that consultation process. So there's just a quick canter through the information included in the paper. So in terms of the conclusions and recommendations that are set out, we obviously, the first recommendation relates to the need of getting agreement that we need to refresh the strategy. And the second recommendation is that we adopt the comprehensive refresh, so option 2, for the reasons set out, just summarised in the slide, that the scale of the changes that we've seen since the original transport strategy was agreed in terms of the policy landscape, the impacts of COVID, prompt the need for a more comprehensive refresh. It provides an opportunity for a deeper engagement with our stakeholders to make sure that everybody is on board all the way through the journey with what we're doing. And the added value of this approach, particularly to our constituent local transport authorities, of this better alignment between the transport strategy and the local transport plan. So the recommendation is that we adopt option 2 as the way forward, rather than the basic refresh option 1. So happy to take the any questions, should there be, about the content of the paper.
Thank you, Mark. Questions? Daniel, start with you.
Thank you. First of all, it was an exceptionally clear paper, so thank you very much indeed. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer that we have to go for something akin to option 2. However, it is quite a lot of money, and the time is not perfect, but it does give us the 5 years, I suppose. One thing I would push for is to make sure that we're very clear on what the outcomes are we're trying to achieve. So it's one thing to say we want to have greater stakeholder engagement, but engagement isn't everything. It's actually bringing them along with us and making sure that we have the buy-in for whatever we go with. And alongside that, I'd like to push for making sure that another outcome is that I presume we want to be positioning TFSE as the voice of the region, so positioning ourselves so that we are able to bring everybody together, drive collaboration, not just amongst the authorities, but also in the partners with National Highways and Network Rail and others. So that's partly why I would push for option 2, because I think that objectivity, the ability to speak objectively and remove some of the politics, would be helpful to everybody. There's a question in there somewhere.
Joy?
Hi, yeah, I concur with what you just said, though it's not the finances that actually worried me on this one. It was the length of time. If it only took, what you said, 2 years to put the first one together, why is it taking, sorry, losing my voice here, 27 months to do a refresh? It just seems an inordinate amount of time, when really we should be about delivery. And this just sounds like we've gone from strategy, we've gone through COVID, and now we're doing another strategy.
That's all right. No.
Hold fine. Yeah, I agree. Firstly, actually, this is clear as a newbie around this table. There's a lot of information in here, and this is straightforward in one sense, although what we're going to do isn't, of course. I too support option 2. I think it's the right thing to do. I'm a collaborator at heart, so taking that collaborative approach is sensible. However, collaboration can mean sometimes slightly more challenging conversations if you're doing genuine collaboration and cooperation. So that might be part of the reason why it's going to take that length of time. But I think if we need to do something, particularly post-COVID, actually, even more so than post-Brexit probably will be for 5 to 10 years. That'll be for the next iteration, probably. But the world is completely different. And in particular, this world is completely different. So I think we should be certainly carrying this forward. And I think something around recognising that kind of that cooperative approach, the collaborative approach is sensible, but I think we need to recognise that might mean some challenging conversations here as well. But yeah, principally, absolutely very happy to support option 2 today.
Thank you, Jeff.
This isn't just my opinion, it's very much, I'm sure, the opinion of the Transport Forum, that they would not appreciate option 1. They'd think that was a shortcut to come back to an agreed answer very quickly. And I think option 2 is by far and away the best option.
Thank you, Vince.
Yeah, thanks. Good presentation. I really agree with the point about the output. What is it we're doing and what are we expecting from it? I think that's having that clarity at the start should make a better outcome. I tried to think what's different about TFSE, why bother at all? And the thing that struck me is the thing that comes off clear in the strategic investment plan is the focus on the corridors, the multimodal nature of it, because each of the components, we've got agencies to deliver. We've got Network Rail colleagues, we've got highways colleagues, we've got the local authority road networks. But in all of those cases, we don't see anything pulling it together, not as a multimodal whole. People in the communities experience the choices of transport not delivered individually. So in this refresh, I think when I read the transport strategy originally, the corridor bit didn't jump out as strong as it does in the investment plan. And so I think it'd be really useful to make sure that this is emphasising the multimodal nature of choice in this refresh and not just another collection of individual agencies.
Thank you. Any other? Rob?
Yeah, I don't entirely agree about option 2, but understand the logic. I'm just trying to think about the world has changed, and undoubtedly it will continue to change and keep changing. I remember writing a business plan for my bank manager on Monday, and he phoned me up Tuesday and told me it was out of date. And I just sort of have that slight feeling that, you know, we sort of could be in that same position. I understand the logic of doing that and all the collaboration and everything else as well. I'm just a bit worried how the amount of time it would take to do that, how the world will change and things will evolve, especially the uncertainty over the next 2 years. I would still go along if that was the, you know, the sort of general feeling, but I'm just still a bit nervous if it's the right thing now.
Daniel, you want another go?
Yeah, can I quickly come back on that? So I agree, the timeline, clearly, I'm not alone in thinking the timeline is a problem. Is it possible to throw some more resource at it and do it faster? Or is it really a question of the time taken to do the consultation and the engagement?
I mean, I'm sure Mark will answer that. If not, my take on all of this thing is it is planned because you do need to have a programme that engages. And if you start to try and accelerate, all of a sudden the important part about talking to people might be the bit that gets dropped. And whilst I'm speaking, I mean, I actually think, why am I still as enthusiastic today about TFSE as when we set this up all those years ago? Because actually I think the best document I have ever read about transport in my life is the Transport for the South East strategy. It absolutely says on there what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And the world has changed. Make no bones about it. The way COVID has come in and all of the other points that have been raised here. So I think it is incumbent on us, and we said we'd do it every 5 years. we can do a quick and dirty and achieve nothing, or we can actually produce what could then be my most important document that I've ever seen, because we can get out of this having started all of the bits that have changed built into the reality of what's going to happen over the next 30 years, because bear in mind this is still out to 2050. This is not this week, next week. This is a long-term strategy. So that's why I'm excited about the option 2 process. And I think if we don't take people with us, as was said by Jeff and others, we will be missing a point. I don't want to get into the horrible conversation about money, but I'm sure that some of our funding for the original document came from DFT's grant in the form that that's what they expected us to produce anyway. So I'm sure they would expect us to do the refresh that we said we were going to do, and it might tick another box when we go back with our begging bowl. But who knows? One day, shortly, we might even be much closer to an annual. Who knows? I'm not not putting any pressure on our colleagues, or to a point where we might have money. Well, we've got 2 years, so let's not be churlish. Thank you for that. So, Vince.
One important point that I've missed. I think a lot of the original data in the original strategy came from 2011. Do we get a 2021 refresh as a result of this?
Is there anyone wants to answer all those questions that I have?
Yeah, I can pick up those points. So on the timeline, I think the point is well made about the amount of time. We're yet to engage a supplier to help us with this process, and that would obviously provide us with the opportunity to see if there is the opportunity to move more quickly through the process. But the point has also been made about this process that we want to do of the co-creation with option 2, that may take more time to do that. So in having that conversation about the length of time and ensuring we get the co-creation right, just making sure we've got the balance there. But we will to move forward with this is about checking the timeline and obviously the cost. Those were preliminary cost estimates. We may be able to do better than that once we've got a supplier on board. On the issue of the outcomes and making sure that we're clearly focused on these big issues around decarbonisation, economic growth, levelling up, I think it connects in with this issue that the USP, if you like, for SDBs is this multimodal approach. I think the answer to some of those big issues can only be tackled by looking multimodally, and I think that's what we bring to the piece as SDBs, that ability to focus on some of these big outcomes through the delivery of a multimodal approach to the way that we should be doing things. In terms of the point about uncertainty, obviously the scenario planning approach that I've outlined is a way of dealing with that, but I think there is the opportunity through the development of the analytical framework that Sarah's leading on about finding mechanisms that will allow us to keep our data continually refreshed. As the point has already been made, that some of the information that we used for the original strategy, we had to go back to 2011 for some of that limited amount, but now that data is becoming increasingly available in real time, is there a mechanism that we could use to make sure that rather than these periodic refreshes of data, that we've got a more continuous feed of information that allows us to track progress more in real time? So that's something that hopefully the analytical framework that's being developed alongside the refresh will deliver on. So I think those are the answers to the main points that have been raised.
Thank you, Mark. Dan. No, come on.
Thanks. Just waiting to see your answers to some of the previous questions before I ask my one. If there is a consensus for option 2, and we do want to have the new updated strategy in place by 2025, which in many ways is a key thing that a regional transport board would do, refreshing that strategy every 5 years. Do you think that timeline you set out is robust to a change in governmental transport policy, given that whoever wins what will be the 2024 general election, possibly second half, whoever wins, actually, I suspect there will be changes to transport policy. And therefore, the last thing we then want to do is, having concluded this new process, go back and say, oh, you know what, we just need to do one more refresh because there's been another great change. And can you mitigate that risk just by tweaking this timescale in a way, sort of back-ending it a little bit, back-loading, so that we're not past the point of no return at the date of the general election?
Yeah. In producing the timeline that I'm just shown on the screen for option 2, the sort of planning assumption that we've made is that we're looking at an October 2024 election. We don't know that that's the case, but that's sort of, in terms of a known unknown, that's sort of what we sort of assumed. And as you can see, that with option 2, that we don't. There's no, that is encompassed within that first blue block. If there was a change of government and a significant, refresh of policy, I would suggest that that's possibly going to take 18 months to 2 years to come to fruition, to know what, if there was a change of government, if there was a white paper being talked about, that would take at least 2 years. So the risk is, if we wait, we'll never get to a point, we'll always be sort of trying to catch up. So I think developing a comprehensive, robust strategy with, the way will provide us with the mechanism to sort of ride those waves. But we do need, this timeline needs to be flexible to take account of, we don't know when an election is going to be called. We may have to adjust this to take account of that once we know. So we've shown this, but we're open to the. We know that we might have to shift things as we move forward.
Thanks, Chair. No, really useful to see. Very supportive, and unsurprisingly, National Highway was fully supportive, and will work with colleagues to develop the revised strategy. The one thing that was in our mind is just alignment to wider planning processes, not just for National Highways, but Network Rail and other rails, and how this evidence used. So it's really useful, Mark, your sort of understanding of where you're thinking about in the short term, but it's how this evidence base is used for RIS4, CP8. Actually, at the point you made as well about other investments, Homes England, for example. So it's about how your evidence base aligns with and integrates with the planning process for all those other strategic organisations. I think 2025 is a good timeline, but it's how that's refreshed for 27 and 28. So it's that keeping it alive. So you've answered a few of my questions just in response here. So thank you for that. But yeah, very supportive of option 2, the more sort of considered and detailed response, but equally recognise that there's a lot of work to do to deliver that, and we're supportive.
Thank you. Rupert.
Reflection on Dan's point there. Part of the work that we've done so far is about informing policy. So we have a Secretary of State who has said that they will have regard to our transport strategy in both setting policy and investment decisions. So a lot of this work, the work we've done to date and the work that we will do in terms of refresh, goes to inform and shape policy. So I think it's vital that we keep officials along the journey with us from the DFT, so that as they are briefing an incoming government of whatever colour, that they are cognizant of the evidence that we have. And I think the other 2 points that Richard made about RIS4 and CP8 and beyond, we are clear that there are some interventions that are currently proposed in the SIP that are unlikely to change with a refresh, but are longer term in the sort of 10, 15-year horizon. And what this refresh will do, I think will do, is reinforce the importance of some of those really significant strategic schemes that we need to start thinking about now in terms of RIS4 and CP8 and CP9.
So you actually see this process is actually in some way leading the conversation with the new government, whether that's the new party or not, but leading with the new administration to actually influence what, again, it's the government
I do. I mean, DFT, who are here, might wish to comment, but the evidence base that we've produced helps ministers in terms of shaping policy and shaping those investment decisions. They have said that is how they will treat our evidence, and I've got nothing to suggest that won't be the case going forward. And I think what has made the sort of STB, the 7 STBs around the country work so well is that single voice. So it brings together local democratically elected members. It brings in businesses, it brings in boroughs and districts. We spoke about land use planning and transport planning earlier. Brings in protected landscapes to speak with a single voice on the issues for the region. That is incredibly powerful. And we do that from an evidence base. So it's evidence-led decision-making that I think ministers should value. So when we talk about things like a funding envelope against which an STB can prioritise, well, you can do that against really good quality evidence.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No? So we have a couple of options. So the first recommendation is that we agree or do not agree the transport strategy refresh is needed. Do we all agree it is needed? Agree. And then we have the alternatives here that we either agree the comprehensive refresh in option 2 should be pursued, or we could go back to option 1. So I guess I need to just get a feel for option 2. Thank you very much. So we're agreeing the refresh of option 2 should be pursued rather than basically option 1. So thank you very much. We come on now to the Audit and Governance Committee paper, and as we don't have we now have a new chair of governance and audit, it would be very unfair of me to stick Joy in at the moment. So I'll ask Rupert to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to update members, the Governance Committee met on the 25th of April and agreed a number of questions. Firstly, that a DfT rep will be present on the Audit and Governance Committee, or rather a standing invitation will be there. They also considered the finance paper that you'll see at agenda item 11. And the Governance and Audit Committee also overseeing the review of the Transport Forum. And there'll be a paper following in your October meeting, which will update you on the latest on the review of the Transport Forum. The committee also gave consideration to the risk register and will hold that oversight role in relation to the risk register, and agreed that it should come to this board, and it's appended in Appendix 1 twice a year for the board to be cited on the strategic risks for the organisation and to comment. Just to highlight, there are 3 risks that we need to keep an eye on. One is in relation to finance. That is both the funding allocations we've received from the department and, of course, the welcome local authority contributions. The second issue is around levelling up, we just need to keep our eye on the levelling up agenda to ensure that the South East is not left behind in that respect, because we know there are a number of communities, a number of areas in the South East that also need levelling up. And the third risk that affects us all is recruitment and the recruitment market for some key areas. So the risk register is Appendix 1 for you to consider. The final point to raise is that we do require another member for the Audit and Governance Committee, Chairman, and it would be helpful, if at all possible, to see if there were a member willing to support Councillor Dennis and other members of the Audit and Governance Committee in their role. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments to start with? Anybody rushing to join the... Sorry, Vince.
Just to be clear, this hand is for the first part, not the second part. But thank you. And I'm sure I'd love to work with Joy, but there's other things I've got to do at the moment. This is a really helpful report, and again, actually, lots of the document. I'll be saying that every time I speak today, I think. So thank you to everyone who's pulled those things together. I wanted to highlight from the risk register, point 8 and point 9, again, picking up on Rupert's previous comments there. I mean, certainly I get really frustrated when levelling up is somewhere else. Actually, levelling up is everywhere. And actually, for some of those very specific transport projects which are part of levelling up, we need to be amplifying the voices for those councils that are putting those things forward. So recognise that that is absolutely a risk, and actually we will continue to make the argument collectively. And I can't not highlight item 8 without talking probably this week about item 9 as well on the risk register. I do think this is quite a risk at the moment. We've got a very straightforward set of councils and bodies. That might get a bit confused. For example, hypothetically, I don't know, if someone was to create, I don't know, a mayor of Kent and Medway, for example.
Surely not.
No, which I definitely wouldn't support for the avoidance of doubt, but hypothetically. Look, things will happen, and we'll share views on that elsewhere, I suspect. But absolutely, I suspect actually that risk register, the likelihood might have gone up from 2 to maybe 3 or 4 in the last 7 days, some would say. So, but again, recognising actually this forum's got a very strong collective voice, and I think we do need to understand what happens if county deals become more than an expression of interest, hypothetically. Thank you.
I'll just answer that for someone who's not rushing to do a county deal, but depends entirely on where you go. Of course, counties will do what counties do, and they're all slightly different, whether it's a combined authority where actually most of the transport responsibilities would sit with the original authority, so you'd still have X number of transport authorities, or whatever. We do need to, the point you raised is a very good one, we do need to be aware of the fact that the landscape may change and be upfront about where we go with that. So that's quite helpful. Rupert?
If I just might add on that, I think it's a good one to pick up, that number 9. And of course, the key is the evidence base. So the transport strategy and strategic investment plan, the consistent, whatever the political arrangements, is the evidence to help either combined authorities or counties through their county deals with their decision making.
And are you sure we can't convince you on the other one, Vince? I mean, you look just like the sort of chap that would love a... It doesn't look like we're going to get anyone rushing. How are we going to overcome this? Because there was talk of a rep as well.
Daniel, I think you are on.
You are on it now, are you?
Governance committee, is that?
Well,
there is a LEP representative on there, and I suppose it matters not how you wish to do that. It's just we recognise that's important. I mean, the audit and governance committee. It's an exciting committee to be on. Yeah. Even more exciting. But what makes it successful is having the members on there. If you are concerned about the level of work, we have a strong secretariat that supports the work of the committee. It's not too many meetings a year, and it does provide that really important oversight for the board. So, for example, the work that the governance committee did on the finance paper, or overseeing it, I think is really helpful before it comes in front of the board here. So it's almost like another layer of assurance.
I think we agree that it makes sense for that.
Yes.
Representation there.
Good.
It's like fighting.
So I can see in your eyes, Daniel, that there's going to be a scrap on there. The other aspect is we do need another local authority elected member on the committee. The quorum number is 126. Where's Rachel? Right. 2 local authority. So we've got Joy, Councillor Humby. So
are you on?
Chair.
Good boy.
Got a left. We need 2 more.
Well done.
I never realised how good you were.
Right. So we do need some more members.
Okay.
If, Chairman, to help move the agenda forward, if members who are thinking, well, this does seem quite exciting, and they want to have a conversation with me after the meeting to enable me to convince, it might be one Councillor Pum that Councillor Newton might be interested in.
Absolutely.
New member.
In his absence. Yeah.
If you were able to take that back and suggest to Trevor, I'm really happy to have a conversation, likewise with any other members.
And we still have Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight missing today as well, so we'll, and a couple of, we'll work on that. Okay. Thank you. So we're asked to note the discussions at the first meeting of the audit, note the discussions at the first meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, agree membership of the Audit and Governance Committee, and agree that the Strategic Risk Register. Are we all happy to do that? Agreed. Thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 9, which is the SIP summary document. And Rachel, you're going to, oh, you're there. Well done, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite nice to be up here and have a break from doing roving mic duties. So my paper today is on the SIP, and board members will recall that in March this year we approved the final version of the Strategic Investment Plan for submission to government, and following the board, we agreed that we would do a summary of the Strategic Investment Plan for publication on the website. The summary document's attached as Appendix 1, and it sets out the key sections of the Strategic Investment Plan. It's intended that it will be published on the TFSE website. The paper also highlights that we submitted the Strategic Investment Plan to government following the meeting in March. We subsequently received a response from Richard Holden, who's the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, welcoming the document and recognising the collaboration that's taken place to produce the plan. He confirmed that DFT officials have been instructed to give the plan due consideration when considering future investment and policy decisions, which is incredibly welcome. Board members are asked to agree the summary document for the Strategic Investment Plan for publication to the TFSE website and note the response from the DFT to the Strategic Investment Plan. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Agree in principles, few errors in the document.
Okay. Please do.
We can pick that up.
Okay. We've dealt with that. I think it's dealt with. You've noted that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask Rachel to stay and do the finance one now? In as much, sorry to put you in this, but Councillor Humby might try and escape in a moment, and I'd just like him to. Sorry for not giving you. Sorry about that. You're going up. Where have you gone? Yeah.
I'm going to make a quick comment. So again, excellent document, but there's one thing that I think we possibly need to change. It says at the end, Steer has prepared this material for Transport for the South East. I'm pretty confident that the team within TFSE has done a phenomenal amount of work in it. Can we change that for to a with?
Done. Thank you. See what trouble you cause. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move on to the finance paper. So the paper sets out the end of year report for 2022 and 2023 and proposes a budget for 23-24. The end of year report was considered by the Audit and Governance Committee in April, and they recommend the report to the board. There was an operating budget of 4 million in the financial year, and the total expenditure amounted to 2.3 million. Appendix 1 highlights the key areas of expenditure, including 745,000 on staff and costs and 1.5 million on the technical programme. Paragraph 2.6 provides further breakdown of the technical spend. The carry forward figure is 1.7 million, and although that seems higher than expected, a large proportion of that 1.7 million carry forward is already ring-fenced or committed to specific work streams, including finishing off the strategic investment plan, the work on the delivery of the thematic programme, and other areas as well, like the Common Analytical Framework and the Centre of Excellence. Moving on to the proposed budget for 23-24. Appendix 2 sets out the proposed budget for 23-24. You did consider an earlier version of this in March 23, noting that the final budget would be presented to the board at this meeting once the carry forward figures had been confirmed. The Audit and Governance Committee considered the revised version of the draft budget prior to its presentation at this meeting. As noted in the report, the budget is based on the indicative funding allocation of just over 2 million from the DFT, and the report highlights that we would provide a verbal update at the meeting. We haven't yet received our final funding letter from the DFT, but we do expect that it is imminent. And as such, we would suggest that the recommendation for the budget is changed, that it's approved the budget for 23-24 subject to receipt of the letter from the DFT, which we expect imminently. In terms of the budget, alongside the local contributions agreed by the board in November 22 and the carry forward, there's an operating budget of 4.6 million for this financial year. Paragraph 3.4 identifies the key areas of the technical programme that we're intending to progress this year. That includes part of the transport strategy refresh. So as Mark explained, the transport strategy refresh would run over 2 years. We've allocated 300,000 for this first year, and the remainder of the money for that would come from the next financial year budget. It also includes a considerable amount of money around the SIP implementation and the analytical framework, which you're going to hear about more from Sarah in a minute. It includes the thematic areas of future mobility, active travel, decarbonisation and freight, as well as some further work on buses and electric vehicle charging strategies. The Centre of Excellence, which we presented to the board on at the last meeting, also includes funding in the proposed budget for next year. The remainder of the budget is made up of staffing costs, communications and engagement activity, and operational costs, and that's set out in paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6. We have also included an uplift to the reserves to just over £400,000 at the end of the financial year, and that reflects that TFSE is likely to take on additional liabilities during 23-24. And as per the grant funding letter that we received from the DFT last year, we do need to make sure that we have sufficient liabilities to close down in the eventuality of a closure of TFSE. The report finally sets out at Appendix 3 a spend position to the end of May 23 against the agreed budget. This is on track so far, as you would expect, and this will be updated and presented back to the board at future meetings. So in conclusion, the Partnership Board agreed to recommend the financial position at the end of the 22-23 financial year, as recommended to the board by the Audit and Governance Committee, agree the proposed budget for 23-24 subject to the receipt of the DFT grant funding letter imminently, and note the financial update to the end of May 23. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Andy.
I'm behind you. I'm not quite behind you, but just one question from me. Is the staffing budget realistic? I think it outturned last year at 745. It's gone up to 1.3, and the narrative says that's for cost of living increases and a full complement. That seems quite a high figure compared to what you spent last year.
It is a sizable jump, and that's a reasonable question. It can be explained by the fact that when we recruited last year, a lot of our members of staff actually came on in the final quarter of the year. So that was only that wasn't for everybody's full-time costs. We also didn't manage to recruit to all of our vacancies, so we're out at the minute for a number of other vacancies, including a transport strategy manager, an analysis manager. We've just done the calculations, and we believe that it will be under the 1.3 million. We're expecting it to be about 1.16 million this year by the time that we get our full complement of staff.
Andy.
My apologies. Been able to does work, doesn't it? Secure your funding letter yet. I hope to be able to convey a decision very, very soon. But I'd endorse everything that's in the paper, and I think what Rachel's outlined enables you to keep the show on the road until such time as we can sort out the administration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have the three recommendations, which are up there. I don't need me to read them to you. Everyone happy? Thank you for that. Thank you, Rob, for hanging on. And apologies to Sarah for singing around. So we go back now to agenda item 10, which is the delivery of the strategic investment plan. Sarah.
Thank you. And morning, everybody. This paper's got quite a lot of detail in it, and obviously most of what's in the report is in the appendices as well, so I'll try and summarise as much as possible in the interest of time. Firstly, around the delivery action plan. So as you're aware, the SIP contains nearly 300 interventions. We need a method to make sure we can actually work with our partners to bring these forward. So the delivery action plan has been developed with that in mind. It sets out the schemes rather than the modally way they were set out in the SIP itself. They're set out on the corridor basis that was set out in the economic connectivity review that Mark referred to right at the beginning. This really allows us to look at that multimodal picture and look at how we need to work with partners to bring forward different interventions in the same place over a phased period of time. So that plan has been developed in consultation with officers and our partners from local authorities, National Highways Network Rail, and that final report is now with you as Appendix A. As well as setting out how we're going to work to deliver the schemes, it also forms a baseline for monitoring and evaluation of the delivery of schemes. And I think that's key. Just keep in mind that the delivery of schemes will be monitored through this delivery action plan. So the board are recommended to agree the delivery action plan if you see fit. Alongside that, we are developing an interactive story map. So these are actually very similar to the ones that were mentioned by National Highways earlier in their presentation. And it's an interactive map that allows people to explore the story of the SIP and the schemes by area by clicking on a map, by clicking on individual schemes, boxes pop up to give further information. I think that's going to be a really useful way of engaging our stakeholders in a more interactive way, and also allow us to really see those interactions between the different schemes as well. So there's a couple of screenshots in your appendices that show what that map will look like when it's been produced. And again, the board are recommended to note the work that's been done and agree that we finish that and then publicise the map. We heard earlier about prioritisation, and again, this is something we've been working on as we've been developing the delivery action plan. We do now have methods by which we can filter schemes via a number of different criteria to come up with sort of what the priorities would be based on those criteria, but it's not possible to actually prepare exact lists at the moment, because until we know the exact parameters around which the question is asked, we can't just sort of prepare a random load of top 10 lists, if you like. So we have the ability to do it. If it is required and it is needed, then any such list would be brought to the board for your agreement before it were submitted to anyone who needed it submitted to them. Alongside that, though, we are very conscious that that is not how we want to prioritise. It is how we have to respond to the current funding landscape. But as a looking multimodally, we want to make that case for that multimodal investment. And so we are looking at undertaking a corridor study which we hope will demonstrate that taking that holistic approach across modes, across networks, in a sequenced manner will deliver greater benefits than the current modally funding-based pots that we're working with at the moment. So that work is underway, and again, we're hoping that will help us with the prioritisation process. Lastly, we've had an internal workshop to consider how TFSE could prioritise schemes if long-term funding was devolved. How as an organisation would that make us different from where we are now, and how would we need to take those decisions? That work's still underway, and further work will be going on with the senior officer group before a further update is provided to the board. Coming on to scheme development work, as mentioned, we have got this delivery action plan, which tells us how we're going to be working with our partners to deliver the schemes. Rachel's just referred to the budget. It's quite fortunate, actually, that came first. We do have allocations, as she said, for scheme development work this year, and we are looking with our partners around how that can be best spent. So it could take a number of forms. It could be TFSE commissioning work for our partners. It could be providing funds for partners to commission work themselves. It could be providing access to the analytical tools. It could be around advocating for schemes. So there's a number of ways in which we can provide support, and we're working with our partners to identify which schemes are ready to go right now. And I think that's the key on that one. It's not a one-off time-limited opportunity. It's how can we best make use of the funds we've got right now to start moving those schemes forward. We do, of course, also continue to manage the motor road network schemes for the region. And in that vein, we facilitated a business case surgery between DFT and our partners, allowing scheme promoters to really ask detailed questions of DFT. I think both parties found it really useful, scheme promoters to understand the constraints in which DFT officials have to operate, but also DFT officials to really understand some of the challenges in delivering the schemes. So that was very welcomed by both sides. There's plans for further workshops as well, and I think that's a really good way to increase that dialogue between the two organisations. We know from the reports that good progress is still being made with the delivery of those MRN schemes, but we are also aware that there are several schemes that are awaiting a decision from DFT or Treasury in order to proceed to the next case, and we're doing what we can to liaise with DFT officials to try and help that along. Moving along to monitoring and evaluation framework, you'll recall from previous meetings of the plans to develop a State of the Region report that can track those high-level metrics that the transport strategy sets out we're trying to influence by the work we're doing. So this isn't about whether we deliver schemes, that's covered in the work I mentioned earlier around the delivery action plan. This is about, are we actually making a difference to the South East, making the difference that we said we were going to in the transport strategy. The report has been through extensive review with your officers, and also lots of discussions around whether or not it's appropriate to set targets. The consensus from that work is that it's not appropriate for TFSE as a sort of voluntary regional partnership to set targets for those wider outcomes at this stage. That is something we'll keep under review, but what we will absolutely do is to monitor trends so we know where we're headed in terms of how those metrics change. A lot of the information for that State of the Region report updates only annually, and it also changes very slowly. So it's only proposed that we will update that State of the Region on a biannual basis, but we will do that. If you're minded to accept the report and agree to its publication, we will also produce a dashboard which allows a sort of bit more easy access, if you like, to some of the metrics, because it is, as you'll see from the appendix, quite a weighty report. We are aware that figure 4.4 is actually missing from the version that's in the appendices, but it will be included in the final version. Lastly, around the analytical framework, again, Rachel mentioned earlier around budget allocated to this stream of work this year. We do have the 280,000 that was remaining from last year's budget, so we are able to be making a start, which is what we're doing. Also, in their funding allocation from the Department for Transport for the North have been awarded funding to work collectively with all 7 STBs to bring together as common analytical framework. So there are a number of ways we can take this forward, even though we're waiting for the remainder of our funding confirmation for this year. In terms of work we have underway, we've got a range of updates to our own SEALA model, which will provide greater functionality, and that will obviously support the work that Mark's doing with the transport strategy refresh, as well as scheme development work. We're also working with TfN around rolling out their DLog system, which is a way of capturing and displaying development data, local plan data, which again is crucial to the transport strategy refresh, but also for all of our planning work. And we're also looking at the rollout of TfN's electric vehicle charging infrastructure tool as well, so to our region. So it's tools that TfN have already developed that can be shared more widely amongst the STBs to all of our benefit. So in conclusion, there's 4 recommendations up there. Firstly, the board are recommended to agree the delivery action plan and the accompanying interactive story map for publication. The board also recommended to note progress with developing a prioritisation framework and scheme development work, including progress with the delivery of TFSE's major road network and large local major schemes. The board also recommended to note progress of development of the monitoring and evaluation framework and agree to the publication of the first State of the Region report, and also to note progress of development of the analytical framework. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions, comments? No? We are happy to agree all the recommendations as printed. Thank you very much. We come on to the rail partnership for the wider South East. Rupert?
Thank you, Chairman. So members may recall we had a discussion about this at the March board meeting, and we'd said we'd bring a paper back. This paper seeks to bring together, or this proposal rather, seeks to bring together Transport East, England's economic heartland, Transport for the South East, along with TfL, Great British Railways, and I note that the legislation for GBR has potentially been delayed, but also the DFT. And this is a recognition that the evidence from the respective subnational transport bodies' transport strategies has that ability to inform decision making and provide advice to the Secretary of State. And you may recall in the William Shapps review, there was a line in there that said there was a desire to set up a strategic partnership around London. And those 3 subnational transport bodies surround London and have an evidence base to support interventions. We know that those radial and orbital routes in and around London are key for our businesses and communities and have a relationship with growth. So we set out a high-level scope for a rail partnership in that wider southeast geography. And paragraph 4 sets out both the benefits to stakeholders and to government. Appendix 1 sets out a governance proposal, and Appendix 2 sets out the remit for this partnership. What I would say is the legislation that enables GBR has been delayed, and I would imagine it will be a struggle to get parliamentary time to get that legislation through. I think it would need to go into King's Speech for the autumn. It is unlikely, I think, that is going to happen. And in the event of an election, I suspect that that enabling legislation would get shoved even further back. But there is a key relationship with Network Rail and London and the DFT. The routes around London have been challenging. And we think it is an opportune moment to get on the front foot following the William Shapps review and set up that partnership rather than having something done to us effectively. So this partnership will bring together DFT, the 3 subnational transport bodies, TfL, and either Network Rail or GBR, probably actually both. And it will follow the remit as set out in Appendix 2. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Questions? Vince?
I think this is eminently sensible, regardless of what central government is doing, actually. This kind of collective approach is to be welcomed. If I think about stuff that's been in the inbox since May the 4th, so that, two relatively small issues, but important to the people of Medway. So the new technology allowing people to touch in and touch out, travelling from Medway to London, that is a good thing. But there's some practical stuff. So where do we have that conversation? And I might grab Heather before she goes. And then the flip side of that, the angry stuff around, again, understandably, around the likely closure of the one-day travel card from Medway to London and other parts of the southeast, of course. Those are small issues in the grand scheme of what we discuss as a body, but actually knowing the right place to take something like those particular issues, I think would be really important. And actually, this is it. Whereas for highway stuff, for example, that's a lot easier to cut through. So I welcome this, not just because of my email inbox, but actually because it's the right thing to do. And this should press ahead almost regardless of what central government is saying about GB Rail or whatever the new government, whoever they are, come next year happens. So yeah, it's fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? Oh,
I should probably comment from a rail perspective as well. I note that GBRTT have offered some thoughts back on the proposal route, and I can't speak on their behalf around that. But what I can say from a southern region is I'm supportive of the direction of travel. I think the alignment with government policy is the right thing to do. Rail is a national system, so integration across the boundaries is really important. What this shouldn't replace our bilateral relationship, but it is important to have a broader perspective. I think the other really positive thing about it is focused on the strategic. It's important it stays there. I think one question I have within there is sort of comments around oversight of performance and whether there's a risk of duplication there. My one observation is if you allow things to become about day-to-day performance, you crowd out agenda speak to talk about the really important strategic things, and it's important you keep that in mind around whatever this becomes, because if it gets sucked into the day-to-day, it will lose its impact.
Excellent. Okay. No other comments or questions. So we are asked to agree the high-level scope for the rail partnership for the wider southeast, agree the proposed governance arrangements for the partnership, and agree the lead officer progresses discussions with on the partnership. All in agree? Thank you very much. Now, I'm supposed to offer you all a break. We've been upping and downing. Do you want a 10-minute break, or do we want to keep going? 5-minute break. Let's have a compromise. 5-minute break. Thank you very much. Please. So we've got quite a few reports now which are for noting. So rather than going through line by line, if I just read them out and then we can decide whether we've got questions. So we start with the lead officer's report. Is there anything on the lead officer's report that anyone, Rupert, you want to?
I might just, I think it's important for the board to note this, that Rachel Ford over there, it will be leaving us at the end of August to join Transport for the North. It's a great opportunity for Rachel, but I think as the board will know that Rachel has been with us since the outset of Transport for the South East, and has been a really important and crucial part of the team. And you've seen Rachel at many board meetings, taking us through finance and governance and programme and SIP development and the like. I'm personally really sad to see Rachel go, on the one hand, but on the other, it's a fantastic opportunity to go and work with a statutory body, no less. And I'm sure at the point that ministers give us our statutory status, Rachel will be back. But Chairman, I think we should record our thanks to Rachel. She's been fantastic throughout
Absolutely.
the time.
I do, and I just add my personal thanks, Rachel. I mean, the commitment in the early days was enormous, and not that it hasn't been all the way through, but to get us where we are, it did need a few inspired people to get us there, and I think you were one of the key drivers. So thank you very much, and we do wish you well. And I guess it's not, I said to Rupert, crossing the Thames, you have to have your jabs done, but it's going home for you, so it's probably not quite so bad as some of us South Coasters, but there you are. Good luck. Thank you. Are there any other points on the, God, I've gone one too far, on the lead officer's report? No? Joey.
Sorry, I know in interest of time I want to go as quickly as possible, but just 2 points I wanted to make. The first one is about the BSIPs. And one of the issues I think a number of us are probably facing on the BSIPs, particularly around the capital side, is actually delivering the projects in a timely fashion. And I think that's where we need some support with DFT, please. In other words, extending it over the period of time. We all know the issues we have with finding and delivering pieces of capital work at this moment, given the current constraints with resources. So if you could possibly support us on that particular piece, that would be great. I'm not don't want to get the detail of it. And the other one is the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure strategy. We're having a lot of success with Connected Curb, which you're probably aware of. However, the one thing that particularly I feel that TFSE could support us with is thinking about the actual power in the network across the piece. That's where the issue is for us at this moment in time. Thank you.
I think I'd agree with your points on BSIP, both in terms of the timescales for delivery, but also some of the inflation costs. So particularly on things like bus priority measures, as we start to get them costed, I think everybody in the sector is feeling the pinch in relation to inflation. So not only do you have the time scales, but you also have those inflation costs. There is the bus centre of excellence that we're plugged into, and we're doing some work as well on bus improvement plans to support local authorities. So I'll make sure that message gets back to the department. On EV charging, there's a couple of bits of work. It's a shame Ben isn't here. I don't know whether Mark's able to touch on the TFN bit that we're plugged into, which I think is potentially quite helpful, as well as the regional EV charging strategy.
Yes, so just to pick up on that, your point about getting a network across the southeast, that's very much the TFSE role here, is about trying to encourage collaborative behaviour between our different constituent authorities to achieve that very aim of getting everybody working together more on this, so that the travelling public have in place a
The point I was making was not just about working together, I mean, we're working with Surrey. It's actually about the power
Yeah,
absolutely. Not enough.
So the thing that we have as part of the electric vehicle infrastructure strategy is a forum that we've set up, and we have both of the DNOs, the distribution network operators, for our region at that forum. So we have that ability to talk to them collectively about our, the needs for the power supply to be there to enable the network to develop. It's Western, I can't remember the name. It's National Grid is one, and not National Grid, UK Power Network, sorry, and there's the other one is Scottish and Southern.
Thank you. No other comments or questions? Thank you. So we come back to you now, Mark. With are there any questions for Mark on the technical programme or anything you want to highlight, Mark?
Just in terms of some updates, the paper makes reference to just some verbal updates that will be given at the meeting. Just three to pick up on. The report makes reference to the lorry parking study that we've had done, that the report would be available in June. Unfortunately, we're still in this place of just trying to finalise that, so it will be available a bit later. And the procurement for the freight strategy rollout, that's been delayed. We've had to raise some inquiries with the potential contractors on that, which has delayed things. And the other thing just to pick up on in the report is the long-awaited LTP guidance, which we still haven't got a firm date. I don't know if Andy's in a position to provide us with an update as to when that guidance may come.
No other comments or questions. So there's a lot of noting there. It's happy to note all of those. Thank you very much. Communication stakeholder engagement update, Lucy.
Just very briefly pick up on the key points from the report. We have been doing a lot of work on post-SIP publication comms, including our area fact sheets, which many of you have now seen. If not, they are published on our website with a very interactive map, which is a really good engagement tool if you're talking to anybody at all about TFSE. We have completed our database refresh for GDPR purposes. That was hugely exciting, but actually went very well. And we haven't lost too many of our number in terms of stakeholder contacts, so that was good. Continuing to support technical stakeholder work streams and the stakeholder groups that sit with them. Just about to embark on the active travel strategy. We've got the inception meeting this afternoon for that, and also closely involved in supporting the transport strategy refresh. We're continuing to work with our town and parish council representatives. That has been a directive of the board and a desire for some time to increase our direct contact, particularly with the clerks of those local councils, so working hard on that. We had a very positive meeting of our university group at the end of April. We do have a recording available of that as promised, if anybody is interested. That one was slightly different because we did hear some student perspectives from across the region about how our transport infrastructure was affecting them and their studies. The private sector group, funding and finance group, continue to meet regularly and are meeting again this month with DFT presence. We've done a lot of work around preparing briefings and meetings and introductions for our new board members, and it's really nice to meet you in person rather than over Teams. We've also had a lot of change, as has already been mentioned, of changes of control within our district and borough councils. We have 46 districts and boroughs in our region, and there are 19 changes of control. So there is a lot of work to do to support our districts and boroughs. And just to echo Councillor Glazier's request from earlier on, if you do have any influence or ability to help us secure new representatives for our county areas, please do let me know. We're working with the leaders' meetings, I should just add, in that regard. The final thing just to flag is our Connecting the South East event, which is our annual conference. The date is confirmed for the 19th of September at the Amex Stadium. if the system has worked correctly, you will have all received a personalised invite for that. But please do join us if you possibly can, and also share with any political contacts, particularly ministerial contacts, and encourage our local MPs to attend if they can. That's it.
Thank you. Questions? Vince?
Thanks very much. Yeah, lots of good information. As a new member of this organisation, really pleased. My question was, it's great to hear good conversations with town and parish councils. I'm obliged to say, I think. But I wanted to get a sense of feeling. So we've got hundreds of new borough and district councillors. So what should they, if they're reading all of their emails, because occasionally people don't, but if they are, what contact have we had with them since May the 4th to let them know, A, this organisation exists, and B, importantly, what this organisation does? Thank you.
Being brutally honest, direct contact has not happened yet. We have a very complex engagement structure when it comes to our district and borough authorities, which I can share a diagram with you after this meeting. But we have split into 5 county areas for the purposes of districts and boroughs. And each of those 5 county areas has a nominated lead. So, for example, for East Sussex, the combined number of districts and boroughs that sit within that county would have a nominated leader from one of those district and borough councils that becomes our primary point of engagement. The way it then works is that those identified 5 leaders are the leaders that we communicate most frequently with and most directly with. And through a mechanism of their choice, which is usually the county area leaders meetings, they liaise with the further council leaders within their area. We do have an open offer, though, to all district and borough authorities that, as we've done, we will arrange team briefings as and when required. Also very happy to attend leaders meetings. Councillor Glazier is always very happy to embark on a road trip, and we're happy to accompany him to come and speak to a collective group of county leaders rather than trying to see all 46 individually.
I think we've got to start again, is the honest answer. I've done a lot of county leaders meetings. Now the leaders, a lot of changes there, and then the feed down through. So it's work in progress. But any advice would be welcome. Joy.
Talk too much. Yeah, just a quick one, really. It was about the, said you were doing some work on the active travel side. And it sort of brought to mind the whole sort of perspective of active travel. And I know we haven't discussed it particularly today, but really around active travel, sort of thoughts around its walking and cycling rather than cycling and anything else, and how we sort of tackling that as an issue.
I would be able to say more on that later after the inception meeting, or Katie Lamb is actually the lead contact for that within our team. But it is very, very high on our agenda and our priority, hence the commitment to develop a regional active travel strategy. We have also now got some really good engagement links with Active Travel England, who have a seat on the Transport Strategy Working Group. So they have an open invitation to sit in with all of our local authority colleagues on a monthly basis. So again, work in progress, but improving and strengthening, and it is absolutely a priority.
Sorry, I was getting cruel.
Yeah, I suppose it's in light of the fact that it appears that a lot of their funding will be dictated by walking, not just cycling, in the future. And that will obviously impact on our current strategy, or certainly our ability to deliver on our current strategy that we actually have both here and on our local accounting ones as well.
Rupert's going to
I think that there's a number of aspects that spring to mind. I think the local walking and cycling improvement plans, really crucial for local transport authorities, as is the LTP guidance that's coming out. I think the relationship with Active Travel England, from our perspective, is growing. I think they've spent the last 12 months or so getting on their feet, putting processes in place, getting people in post, and I think there's two aspects. One is the link to Active Travel England. One is the other link, which I think we're establishing with the policy reins holder at the DfT, so Rupert Furness and his team. There's a number of strands. And the other, I think, and it touches on the SRN work, you know, when we talk about some of the communities, you mentioned Worthing earlier, that's a brilliant example. Richard will draw breath through his teeth in a minute. But if we were, for example, in our strategic investment plan, looking at putting a tunnel to improve through traffic through Worthing, then the opportunity to free up active travel modes, better public transport modes. So those people, and I know you know the area well, Joy, who are coming up from Worthing to go to Sainsbury's, don't travel along the SRN to do their weekly shop. They're using public transport, they're using different modes. So there's a number of strands in which we can influence. I think fundamentally the local walking and cycling infrastructure plans are key. And if we need to broker relationships with our local transport authority colleagues, with either the DfT's policyholders or Active Travel England, then we can do that. And I think Lucy's point about the regional active travel strategy, so looking at it through a slightly different lens about, well, how does this function on a regional basis? I think you then join the dots up to provide that overarching line of sight from policy right through to delivery. And it feels like we are making strides in that direction now.
Thank you for that, Troy. So we are, where are we? Sorry, I've recommended partnership board with them and note the engagement communication activity. Apologies. Right. On to agenda item 16, which is the Transport Forum. Jeff, you're going to introduce, please.
Yeah. I'm actually going to say something now. It overlaps with some of the things that you were just talking about as well, Joy, so that's good. The most recent meeting took place on Tuesday, the 6th of June, was attended by just 19 members of the forum, and the two big items on the agenda were the Transport Strategy Refresh, obviously, and the Transport Forum Review. So Mark gave us gave the forum a lot of detail around the Transport Strategy Refresh and sought feedback from the forum, always a dangerous thing to do. But some of the comments received, a request for greater focus on active travel and decarbonisation measures. It would be good to take a place-based perspective. That's not easy to say. It would be good to take a place-based perspective rather than modally. And then the question I asked earlier, played back here. If the country is in a worse financial state than when TfS started the journey, it's important to be honest about the availability of public resources in the near term and not be fishing, or it makes sense. We then had a session on the review of the Transport Forum because the 19 people that attended as well, plus TFSC people as well, but with only 19, we were worried that we weren't getting a broad view of the Transport Forum. So we worked with the 19 that have been good enough to join virtually, because most of our meetings are virtually, given the numbers involved. So we had a session on the review of the Transport Forum, why it was being undertaken, attendance and that sort of thing. And so we asked the forum to agree or disagree with 4 different statements and encouraged to have a debate, and we certainly did. 3 possible options were then outlined, and the forum was again encouraged to discuss the options and share their thoughts. And those elements of feedback have been collated into a summary document already. But in addition, because the attendance was so low, we have now also sent a survey. We've emailed a survey to all Transport Forum members just over a week ago, really to capture, it's going to everybody who are members of the forum, but especially including those who are not present at the meeting, because we want to ensure that all forum members have had the opportunity to share their views, and this information will also be shared with the Audit and Governance Committee to inform their review. And that's quite a big change. There's quite a few committees now. I think on the last count, I'm not sure, 5 or 6, as well as the Transport Forum. So one of the reasons why we're pulling this together and we are getting more information and taking it to the Audit and Governance Committee is to make sure that each of these committees is clear about what they're doing and what their overlap with other committees are as well. So that's going on. We will plan is to produce a report from the Transport Forum, which goes to the Audit and Governance Committee, and from the Audit and Governance Committee, it will be presented to the Partnership Board in October 2023. And hopefully that will start to bring all the strands back together, because they've all got a bit dissipated. And obviously, in the course of that Transport Forum meeting, we also updated them, all those attending, on the strands of the current technical work. So, sorry that's more long-winded than usual.
Apologies, thank you. Any questions for Jeff? Vince?
And I think that's part of the reason why, organisations like this have audit and governance committees, just to give things a fresh pair of eyes. So I think that's a very pragmatic, sensible approach, which I certainly welcome, and obviously look forward to that coming forward, I think, eventually to us here in the autumn. Thank you.
All you have to do is become a member of the Audit and Governance Committee, Vince, and then we're laughing.
That's not fair. Good try. Any other points or questions?
Can I just ask, do you feel you've got a good wide-ranging type of people on there? Because the one thing that we've noticed on consultations is the pressure groups will cry the first and put the most pressure on. But there's a huge silent majority. And I suppose when I think about those, often it's, if we look at an active travel, it's often those people who walk rather than cycle. So the minority tend to be there and quite active, but the majority have no sort of representation at all. So how do you sort of cope with that?
I think we cope with it by recognising it in the future, Joy. It's become more apparent over the last year, I think, that the people, like in active travel, have become more vociferous, and other people have perhaps thought that the Transport Forum was going down one dedicated route. We're very much aware of it, and that's why we have done this survey, to try and get a wider view than we're getting from the small attendance at that last meeting. Okay.
Thank you. The recommendations are there for us all to see. Are we all happy to accept those? Thank you. We now come to the responses to consultation. Rupert, is there anything you want to highlight there? We've read them all, but
there isn't. There's 7 consultations. We submit the consultations and then come back to the board, because quite often consultation deadlines don't align with our board meetings, to seek your endorsement to the responses. So I'm really happy to take any questions that you may have on.
Any questions on the 7? No, so we're just endorsing those. Thank you. we'll come to any other business and date of next meeting, but we have got a confidential item, so I don't want you all rushing away after this. So, is there any other business that anyone wants to raise? No? You can do what you like.
Keith, I was just going to, throughout this meeting, we've talked about lack of funding, recognise the challenge I think struck in your paper. We talked about the bus better schemes, and I wonder if in the future, or maybe as part of the transport strategy, we need to be realistic that public transport in particular is in a worse situation now than when transport than TfSC started. And everything we talk about here is a delta to improve. The village I live in lost all its bus services in March. So you either have active travel, but there's no safe walking routes or cycle routes, or you get the car. And I think at some stage we need to recognise, and maybe refresh the transport strategy is the right place, that public transport is suffering at the moment, is in a serious crisis because the provision isn't there. And as well as looking at improving, how can we use some of the mechanisms we have to at least note and encourage that improved public transport, because it is a danger of sounding like we're sort of detached from the reality that people find in their communities. And we're talking about making it better always, but in some places it just isn't, and that's come across in a few of the presentations. And with the funding challenges we had and we have, that's not going to get any easier. So I think somehow we've got to balance that decline in public transport provision in some areas with the improvements we're making. It's a thought and something for a future agenda item, and maybe the transport strategy refresh.
Yeah. My personal immediate reaction is that we're all in different places, and that's the problem. The problems that our colleagues in Kent are experiencing this year, we had 4 years ago, and you know, all of these things. But the fundamental about the fact that public transport and bus companies are under pressure, I think, is something we could quite easily have a conversation about. Rupert.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of points. So, local transport authorities are facing significant pressures. I mean, mainly driven by social care, to be honest. Demand for children's social care, for services, more complex cases. Same with adult social care. If I look at East Sussex County Council, for example, by 2027, nearly 5% of the population will be between the ages of 65 and 85. So those care demands are quite significant. And so local authorities have to juggle all this, which has meant that some really difficult decisions around bus subsidy, so rural buses, have had to be made. I think it'll be really interesting to see what the government does with the £2 fare in October, because that has had quite a transformational impact. I think a number of authorities are pursuing things like demand responsive transport, digital demand responsive transport, to plug the rural bus connectivity. I think there is a broader question about the cost of driving a car by comparison to the cost of public transport, and both bus and rail. So rail and bus travel has disproportionately increased in cost over car travel, which has basically stagnated. That leads you into some of our broader policy ambitions around how do you introduce sensible demand management tools. I think probably for the next couple of years, any policy conversations about that are probably not going to come forward. But I think that potentially provides a tool to help Vince with the points that you make around bus travel. I think it might be a helpful opportunity actually to bring something back here about public transport so that all members are cited on the differences across the patch and some of the things that individual authorities are doing with it.
Can I build on action? Can we make sure that we're talking about not necessarily just going with the mould and saying it's a problem, but trying to break the mould? And I think rural transport is a case in point. There's clearly demand. At least Vince wants to travel. I suppose he's not alone in his village. But being less flippant, there's an increasing number of demand responsive services which need mechanisms to be enabled. But that's just one option. I think breaking the mould is something we should also consider trying to make make part of our reputation.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. Is there any other business? So then the date of the next meeting is the 30th of October, and it will be virtual. We won't have the pleasure of all meeting, but probably a bit less travelling. So with that, then we'll close this meeting and then